Hey everybody, this is Dr. Mark in Santa Fe. Welcome back to our second Facebook Live here on this, once again, a very cold, blustery, I guess we'll say autumn night. I don't think it's fair to call it winter yet. We have to give autumn its true due. It's quite beautiful though. People that know me know that I love this weather, so no complaints, even though I'm all bundled up here. So I had jury duty today, jury duty selection. And it's the most nerve-wracking experience, which many of you probably know if they do jury duty where you are. I've got to go back for a couple of trials in November that seem like they'll be pretty straightforward, so that's a good thing. But just sitting there, and it's a real challenge to go through that process and feel like, how can you be authentic to yourself? And you've got this room of 45, I think, other people. Part of you doesn't really want to do jury duty, and the other part of you wants to be really authentic with who you are and find the balance between the two. And I brought a really good book with me today, which my friend Patty in Mexico gave me last Christmas. And it gave me a chance to read it while I had some downtime, and it turned out to be a real blessing. And I wanted to share a passage with you. It's pretty brief from this book because it talks about what I think really epitomizes the journey of rediscovering who you are. So I'm going to put my glasses on so we can get through this tonight. And this is, so Elizabeth, I'm going to say H. It's probably H, but I don't know. And I just looked up her wiki page, and so she was born and raised in Budapest in the late 1800s, and then just passed away in 1994, I think. I don't see that here, but anyway, she and a co-founder, kind of a life partner of hers, co-founded a yoga school, the first one in Europe, in Budapest, in Hungary, way back in the 1930s. And then after World War II, they had to flee because of communism, ended up in Switzerland and opened up a new yoga school there. She's an incredible spiritual writer. And she writes about her own, it's an autobiography of sorts, but she writes about her own life contemporaneously, but also writes about her knowledge of having lived another life as an Egyptian princess in Egypt, of course, way back. I don't know when. But it's a fascinating book about how that informed her spiritual journey and what she taught to others. So this passage I want to read you is part of the foreword of the book, which was written by her co-founder, whose name is Selva Yasudian. And part of it's written in Selva's tense, and then part of it is quotation of Elizabeth. But she writes, "In the presence of my teacher, I enjoy absolute independence of thought, for I have learned that it is wrong to want to apply the thoughts of another person in one's own life." And then she quotes Elizabeth, "I don't want you to simply follow me on the path I am following to reach the goal," she has told me. "Go your own way, on the path you select for yourself, corresponding to your own innermost inclinations. Don't accept any statement because I made it. Even if it is true 100 times over, it's still not your truth. It is still not your experience, and it will not belong to you. Bring truth into being, and then it will belong to you. Regard the lives of those who have achieved truth only as proof that the goal can be reached." And then Selva goes on to say, "At these words of my teachers, I was seized by an irresistible drive towards absolute independence, and this urge freed me from the nefarious attitude of expecting help from the outside. I don't need a teacher that influences me, but a teacher who teaches me not to allow myself to be influenced." And I just think that's absolutely beautiful. If you have any desire to read this book, it's fantastic. It's really thick, but in the winter here in the U.S., it's a great read. But I don't think anything that I've read anytime recently speaks about the journey of what I call Paradise Rediscovered and discovering who you are better by teaching you that the teachers that we've had in our lives they gave us data. but we were too young to know that. We took it as truth. And that data was really just for our consideration. And as we get older now, we've got to find ways to kind of sift through it and within that find ourselves again and come into ourselves. So I hope you'll take an opportunity to look at the book Initiation by Elizabeth H. and see what you think. So last week, I sort of gave an introduction to Paradise Rediscovered and to what we might do in these series of Facebook Lives going forward. And tonight I wanted to share a technique that I use that I actually wrote about in my blog or spoke about in my vlog this week on Monday at transformationallifeguidance.com under the Dr. Mark's Musings tab. And that is the concept of using wisdom figures. And I don't want to repeat everything that I did in that blog, so it's there if you'd like to take a look at it. But what prompted it for me this week is that I've been feeling a lot of anxiety and restlessness in these past few days. And part of it was actually because I had to go to jury duty and didn't know quite how I felt about that, but it was more than that. And I happened to text Carlos in Mexico, I think yesterday, and I said, I don't know, I'm just not being productive today, and I'm feeling kind of anxious. And he said, I don't understand it. He said, I'm feeling that way too. So I know that it's not just me, number one, but I didn't know what it was related to specifically, and it didn't matter all that much. But what I did know is that anxiety and just kind of general angst was disrupting my work and even my downtime. I mean, I couldn't just lay around and do nothing, which I'm usually pretty good at. So it was very, very persistent. I don't feel this way very often, but when I do, I know things are brewing. And to be fair, there's a lot changing in my life right now. Things that I have a pretty good sense of what's happening, and I'm really excited about what's going on. But still, it's creating this angst in me that's very, very uncomfortable. I'm sure you can probably relate that movement of any kind in our lives, whether we choose it or not, just creates a lot of angst and unknowns. You know, we don't know what the outcome is going to be. I wrote my doctoral dissertation on that with people who had experienced major cardiac events in their life and obviously survived. And I was going to say emailed, I interviewed them. And we talked about the way that their lives changed in the time after that happened to them, and the transition that they entered as a result of that major life event that left them in a place of not being the same anymore, of who they thought they were, but not knowing at all who they were going to be and what direction they were headed. So if you can relate to this, scroll down for a minute down below and just jot a quick comment and tell us what that's about. It's a universal thing. It's nothing abnormal. When I work with clients and do workshops, there's a lot of talk about transitions and specifically transitions that lead to transformation, which is what my patients who I interviewed for my dissertation had experienced. And one of the things that I've learned is that it doesn't matter if the transitions are planned or thrust upon us by some outside force. Either way, we end up in this unknown territory by definition. And it's a really, really hard place to be. I think one of the reasons it's so difficult for me and for most people is that nobody can be there with us. It doesn't matter who we have in our life, who is the greatest support, whether it's a partner or a friend or a colleague or a spiritual advisor. They still can't be in that place with us when we are in the midst of that full-on transition. It's Thomas More, I think it was, wrote about the neutral zone, and it's just this dark void. So totally normal, as much as I'm making it sound like such a dreadful place. The upside is that if you stick with it, it's kind of off topic of tonight, but if you stick with it, you'll get to the other side. You'll eventually see that light at the end of the tunnel, and you've made it. And in that moment, you will be transformed. And I guess it is related to what we're talking about tonight, because on that journey of Paradise Rediscovered, it's the same sort of thing where you start to shed the layers of what people have taught you. And when you do that, you sometimes have to shed those people, either because you choose to or because they just don't want anything to do with you anymore. They're offended or think you're ungrateful or whatever the words that we hear from people that truly do care about us. So anyway, so I sat with myself yesterday and And getting back to the concept of wisdom figures, I'd encourage you to look back at the blog if you like, because I'm not going to explain exactly what that is tonight, but you'll get the gist. But the wisdom figure that I chose was Wayne Dyer, of all people. So he passed away, as many of you might know, I think it's been about 3 years now. And so I conjured him up and I asked him a simple question, which is all you do when you have a wisdom figure. And you basically say, knowing me as you do, what advice do you have for me in this moment? Now, I didn't really even know what was going on, but I could ask a question that was sort of broad and still get at his perception of what was going on in my life. And the answers came pretty quickly. And I said, Wayne, what do I do? What do I do in this moment? And he said to me that the angst I was feeling, without getting specific into about what exactly it was coming from, was in general just about my continued journey on my path of rediscovering who I am. And if you tuned into last week's Facebook Live, which is also again at the website if you want to watch it, or I think it's on Facebook too, forever. We talked about Paradise Rediscovered. I described it as this journey of using life's trials and tribulations as moments of opportunity that can guide us back to our true selves, to a place where we were when we were born, with this pure sense of self, and that had been programmed out of us in the early years of our lives. And there's nothing we did wrong in those moments. It's just that we were like this sponge when we were young, and we absorbed everything that people told us, and that pushed out of us everything that we were born with that was so pure. I remember Wayne Dyer in a movie called The Shift. He talks about how we go through 9 months, the initial 9 months of our beingness, our life in the womb, and everything's taken care of for us, he says, and that we grow and we develop and everything kind of comes where it's supposed to be, and we don't have to do anything, and then we're born, and then the parents say thank you very much, and they take over and kind of recreate this being in their own image, in a sense. So in my case, Wayne advised that I sit with my anxiety for a bit and just try to listen to its message. And what that reminded me of was something that Debbie Ford, who's someone else that passed very young, several years ago, but she's an author. She wrote a great book, two great books, but one of them is called The Dark Side of the Light Chasers. And she talks about this technique of basically befriending these things that cause us difficulty in our lives. So the way you do it is basically you give it a name, so you name it, and then you have a conversation with it. And so in this case, anxiety, maybe it would be called Anxious Andy. No offense to anyone that might be named Andy out there. But so I could sit down and I could say, okay, Andy, I know that you have a purpose. You're happening for a reason. Nothing just comes randomly into life. So if you're here for a reason, and if you cause me to feel anxious, what is the message you're trying to give me? And the assumption is that if you listen to that message and hear it, that Andy can sort of just take a back seat in your life at that moment and stop being so present, so the anxiety subsides until maybe you need to hear it again. But Wayne suggested that what I would hear if I opened myself to the knowledge in the moment and had that conversation. He didn't suggest that I talk to Anxious Andy, but I thought of that myself, thinking of Debbie Ford. What Wayne Dyer said that I would hear was that it was a clue for me taking the next steps in my journey, that something about forgiveness, about individuality, about compassion, and self-assuredness with no apologies. And those things really came into play today with the jury selection. Not so much forgiveness yet, we didn't get into the cases too much, but certainly my sense of individuality and not going with the flow of what other people were saying there in the room as they got grilled about their perceptions of different things and people, and it was kind of interesting to listen because you sort of knew what they were getting at but weren't saying it. And we'll have to see if that comes to be in the trials. But certainly forgiveness will come in, individuality of being who I was in that room, compassion for sure. I didn't need to hear a trial to have compassion for these five young men, it turned out to be, who were just sort of sitting there and had to be paraded in front of us. And as we decided whether we knew them or not, or their families. So compassion for them and self-assuredness with no apologies. So my ability to practice in that room today, being able to say how I felt about certain things and not apologizing for it. It's just the way that I feel. So Wayne Dyer told me that once I opened myself to re-experiencing these things that I came into this world appreciating and had since pushed away by no fault of my own, I'd be able to take the next steps in my journey. So I sat for a few minutes. I was on the floor here in my office, and I always I like to sit on the floor. I could sleep on the floor. And I like to face east, and I'm facing east now. And east, to me, the floor gives me a sense of grounding, of course, but the east direction for me has always been associated with the sunrise and with new beginnings, new opportunities. When my former kitty cat passed away, I buried her in the yard here, which I then found out was against the law, but I did it. And I faced her east in the little grave that I dug for her, because I felt like it was an opportunity for new beginnings for her. So I just sat there on the floor here facing east, closed my eyes for a few minutes and just sort of noticed what was going on. And what I noticed initially was that the unease intensified a bit. I actually felt worse for a few minutes. And then I understand from when I used to do therapy with people that oftentimes as you begin to get in touch with things, stuff gets stirred up and you feel worse. You just have to stick through it. So I asked Wayne, though, what that was about. Why did I feel worse in this moment than I did before I started, when I felt pretty bad? So he said that the increase in anxiety served two purposes for me. It was a point of contrast, kind of ramping up the contrast. Okay, I'll just say that. I can't think of the word. But ramping up the contrast so I'd really notice it when things got better. And secondly, it was also my way of knowing that the journey of rediscovery that I'd set upon was a really important one. There was a lot at stake. And that while the universe would always make sure I was safe, I didn't fully trust that. And that reminded me of a lot of readings and things writings that I've done over the years. But I didn't fully trust it. I'm human, and so the anxiety was fear-based. It was unnecessary, but it was very real. So after this session, it took maybe 10 minutes of my time. It's not something that takes a long, long time. I thanked Wayne for the wisdom. Thought a little bit more about it, what it all meant. And I came up with a list of things that my takeaways. There were 4 things that were really, really important. Number 1, from the wisdom figure session I got, when we're on that journey of rediscovering who we really are, that path of coming back to who we really are, we're going to feel what I call dis-ease. So D-I-S dash E-A-S-E, dis-ease, unease, disharmony. Remember that the feelings they're an emotional experience. So if you tend to be more somatic, you might feel that in your body, but they're definitely emotional if nothing else. But if you do tend to get somatic, then you may indeed get sick. It's sort of like feeling worse before you get better. So there's this combination for most of us of an emotional disease and maybe a physical disease. So that's number 1, totally normal. The second piece is when we feel that disease in whatever way that we do, the most important response in that moment is to sit with it and hear its message. Again, give it a name, ask it what it's here to tell you, listen to what that is, even if you don't agree, just hear it. And then thank the wisdom figure, or in this case, anxious Andy. Thank Andy, let him go on, and hope he doesn't have to come back. So number 3, so that validates it. Number 3, to support ourselves in this process, we can call upon a wisdom figure, as I did, to guide us in our inquiry. And again, if you want to learn the simple process and a little bit of the background of what a wisdom figure is, go to my video blog at transformationallifeguidance.com. Click on the Dr. Marks and Musings tab up in the upper right-hand corner, I believe, and you'll see the most current vblog, but you can scroll down if you're watching this at a later date. It's called The Wisdom Figures to the Rescue. So watch that replay, 15th of October, 2018. Number 4, once you have a sense of what's going on, what's causing that disease, come up with a plan to incorporate that into your daily life. Take those teachings and see how you can be a little bit more intentional of using them. So for me, it's those things that Wayne suggested were crucial to my moving forward: the forgiveness in individuality, compassion, and the self-assuredness of who I am with no apologies. So you may find that your wisdom figure gives you different advice, but remember that you're never alone on this journey. Your wisdom figures are just there for the summoning. It's very easy. And I really want you to start this process this week. Identify a wisdom figure or two, and then next, and play around with the wisdom that you get for them, because they're all clues to who you really are, and the stuff that you're going to be challenged with in life that force you to face those core issues, like mine were, and then kind of putting those pieces back together in a way that works better for you, that better represents you. So if you do that this week and start looking at how they can work for you, then beginning next week in the next Facebook Live, what we'll do is start a process of actually identifying the challenges, connecting the dots as to how those challenges relate to those core issues, and then putting a plan in place to helping you move forward. So if you have any comments, I'd love to hear them. If you want to scroll down right now and put them in, I'll be happy to answer them while we're on our Facebook Live. But if not, you can always do that here later, and I'll look back at them. You can do it at transformationallifeguidance.com. There's also a Facebook Live archives page that you can look at. And otherwise, we will meet here again next week. And just remember that you're protected. You know, a guide of mine, Claire Goodwin, maybe she's out there, I don't know, but she's a wonderful, wonderful advisor that I've talked to for years. And I remember in my most anxious moments and calling her and saying, Claire, I need to talk. Her website is claritywithclaire.com. And she would always tell me, Mark, you're protected. You're protected. The universe is never going to allow you on a journey of any kind. And in this case, a journey of rediscovery that endangers you in any way. You are protected. So always remember that and go forward. Meet us here next week, and we'll continue the journey. Thank you so much. Blessings, gratitude from chilly Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I know it's beautiful wherever you are. Good night.